Tonight, the stalemate over the shutdown. Democratic Congressman from Connecticut Jim Himes joins us to discuss whether the two sides can come together and still save faces with their bases. It's also day one of the new Senate, and Republicans are wielding a larger majority. A Senate correspondent joins us to look at the significance of that. And also, Facebook is facing 2019 with a whole slew of privacy issues. Privacy concerns and other problems. Can the social network regain the confidence of its users? Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Andrew Whitman, in tonight for Richard French. A new Congress has just been sworn in, and now they're dealing with the same old problem, a government shutdown that started right before Christmas. And a short time ago, President Trump made a surprise visit to the White House briefing room to make his case for the wall, and he brought along border agents to chime in.
You can call it a barrier, you can call it whatever you want, but essentially we need protection in our country. We're going to make it good. The people of our country want it.
I've been a Border Patrol agent for 21 years. I can personally tell you from the work that I have done on the southwest border that physical barriers, that walls actually work.
It comes down to border security. And we're extremely grateful to President Trump, and we fully support what he is doing to take care of our nation's borders, to take care of the future of this United States. It has nothing to do with political parties.
We're talking about murderers, rapists, people that commit very serious crimes in this country. ICE has been doing an amazing job in deporting a lot of these people back to their countries. Unfortunately, once we deport these people will not stay in their country. These criminal aliens that have been released from jail, that have been deported, will come right back into the United States. However, if we had a physical barrier, if we had a wall, we would be able to stop that.
The three gentlemen you just heard from, I should point out, also officers in a union that represent border agents. Meantime, the shutdown saga plays out with no end in sight.
The 116th Congress of the United States, the House will come to order.
A new Congress, a new Democratic majority in the House. First order of business, ramping up the pressure on President Trump to reopen key parts of the government.
We are giving him a Republican path to do that. Why would he not do it?
New House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Democrats aren't budging. No money for the president's border wall. The president tweeted this morning claiming the fight is about 2020. Quote, the Democrats know they can't win on all of the achievements of, quote, Trump, end quote. So they're going all out on desperately needed wall and border security. Democrats voted on a package of bills to fund the government without funding for the wall, but the Republican majority in the Senate is already pushing back.
The Senate will not waste its time considering a Democratic bill which cannot pass this chamber and which the president will not sign.
It appears the stalemate worsened after a contentious face-to-face in the Situation Room yesterday between the president and congressional leaders.
They are now feeling the heat. It is not helping the president. It is not helping the Republicans to be the owners of this shutdown.
With the effects of the shutdown literally piling up and 800,000 federal workers furloughed or working without pay, the president is saying brace for the long haul.
Could be a long time, and it could be quickly. Could be a long time. It's too important a subject to walk away from.
And just moments before he was sworn in for another term, I spoke with Congressman Jim Himes. The Democrat from Connecticut serves on the Financial Services and Intelligence Committees. Congressman, first of all, congratulations on being sworn in for another term today. Let's start with the shutdown. Speaker Pelosi says there's no money for the wall and she won't agree to any. Do you agree with that take? Will that take work?
There is money for border security. That's the important thing. We are passing today a bill which has just shy of $2 billion for border security. And when I say border security, I mean the stuff that all the experts say works. More men on the ground, technology, yes, some barriers. It's not a wall per se. Now, mind you, this is a bill that passed unanimously in the Senate just 2 weeks ago. So I expect that if the Senate does what they did 2 weeks ago, and that's an interesting question, of course, there will be a bill out of Congress to reopen the government very, very soon. The question is, of course, whether the president chooses to sign it or not.
Well, and on that point, do you expect the president to eventually concede on wall funding? He certainly hasn't made that many concessions in his presidency. And obviously in a pre-Trump D.C. compromise where both sides have to give a little something to get ahead usually wins the day.
Well, we'll see what happens. Look, Trump owns this shutdown, and that's not a Democrat talking. That's Donald Trump talking. He told Chuck Schumer it was his shutdown. He would be proud to do it. You know, as the shutdown progresses, more Americans are going to feel the pain associated with the shutdown. I'll give you one example. We're getting to a point in February when IRS tax refunds start getting mailed out. That could be screwed up by a government shutdown. There's national parks issues. There's a larger issue here, Andrew, which is that a government shutdown, and I haven't been around that long, I've been around just shy of a decade, a government shutdown is not a tool that should be in anybody's toolbox, and I've seen them too often used. Federal employees and the American people pay the price. So what the American people need to understand, quite apart from the inconvenience of the shutdown, is that nobody should play that card. It's just too dangerous a card to play, and the president shouldn't be playing it, and we should be reopening the government and doing what most Americans know is the right thing to do, which is, yes, good funding for security at the border, but it should occur to those people who defend the wall that no expert says that a wall from sea to shining sea is how we solve our illegal immigration problem.
But if the president won't make that concession on wall funding, are you prepared to ride this out and keep the government shut down until State of the Union, until the end of January, until potentially longer?
Andrew, it's a mistake to negotiate with people who are holding hostages. All that does is encourage more hostage taking. The President of the United States, President Trump, is holding the American people and the government of the United States hostage to one of his wacky ideas. And so, no, not only is caving in the case of this wall a bad use of your money and my money. Again, nobody out there is saying that the way we keep this country safe is by building a big and beautiful wall. It's also not a good way to send the message that in a country like the United States, we are not going to let any individual, even the President of the United States, get their way by threatening a government shutdown.
The plan from the Democratic caucus in the House is to start passing bills and start legislating as quickly as possible. Issues like voting rights, ethics, campaign finance reform, all on the laundry list, all should be handled early. Those bills are likely to pass the House, but a lot less likely to pass the Senate, and even less likely to be signed by the president. It's effective in establishing the differences between the two parties, but it's less effective for getting stuff done and making laws. What's the value then, Congressman, of sticking to an agenda that's more ideological than practical, at least in 2019?
Well, Andrew, I guess I think you're probably talking about H.R. 1, which is anything but a Democratic bill. It is a bill that says that if you pay millions of dollars for a political advertisement, you ought to say, hey, I'm Jim Himes and I paid millions of dollars for this political advertisement, or whoever you are, David Koch or anybody, unions. If you pay millions of dollars for an ad, you ought to say, I did this. I don't see how that's a Republican or a Democratic thing. Making sure that our voting places are secure, that there's money for the security of our elections, that's not a Democratic or Republican thing. That is something that the American people as a whole demand, and we're going to pass that as H.R. 1. We'll see if it gets bipartisan support. If the Republicans in the House don't support it, or if the Senate doesn't support it, hey, the American people need to ask those people who voted no, why are you opposed to a cleaner government, to an election that is more about individual votes than people's big money? So that said, and you may be right, maybe for whatever reason the Republican Party is going to decide that that's a partisan issue. Look, there's other stuff that I feel very strongly about. Transportation infrastructure, where we all come from, that is an essential thing for the economy and for the quality of life. I'm happy to work with the president on transportation infrastructure as a Democrat. He said he wanted a massive $1 trillion investment in that thing. Let's do it. So again, I hope that clean government and fair elections doesn't become a partisan issue, but if it does, there's other things like transportation infrastructure that we can take up with the president.
Well then, Congressman, what's the metric we should measure the effectiveness of the Democratic House by? The stuff that gets passed in the House or the stuff that gets passed and signed into law?
Well, look, we have divided government now, Andrew, and so, yes, nobody has their say entirely. And so I think the metric to judge the House by is the stuff that we are passing, is it good for America? And if it's good for America, and every citizen needs to make that determination, clean elections, forbidding members of Congress from serving on corporate boards. If you hate that stuff, sure, get angry at the Democrats. But if you actually think that stuff's a good idea, and the Republican Party and the Republican president is opposing those things, at that point you need to scratch your head and say, who's standing in the way of the things that I like? That's the responsibility of every American citizen, and I would hope that American citizens would exercise that responsibility.
Congressman Himes, you, of course, sit on the House Intelligence Committee. A couple of questions related to some issues that are going to come up there. The first of which caught me a little bit off guard. You're the co-sponsor of a bill that would reestablish the power in the War Powers Act and give Congress a larger say in the use of military. I remember the War Powers Act being invoked a lot under Presidents Carter and Reagan, but it really hasn't been touched recently. What's your goal here? Is it aimed at reeling in President Trump or reeling in all presidents when it comes to the use of military force?
Andrew, it's without question reeling in all presidents when it comes to their decision to use military force. And look, I didn't like the fact that President Trump essentially went to war with Syria by launching missiles into one of their air bases. I also didn't like the fact that Barack Obama undertook a military campaign in Libya, Republican and Democrat. The Constitution of the United States says that the power to declare war, to go to war, to use our men and women in uniform, to put them in harm's way and risk their lives is the prerogative of the Congress. And so the Constitution is right about that. But more to the point, there's a reason why the Constitution is right about that, which is that no decision we as a government make is quite so important as when we say to our young men and women, we are going to send you to a far-off place and you may die when you are there in defense of your country. That is not a decision that should be made by any one person. It is a decision that should be made by the representatives of the people in the Congress. And so, yes, that is a very important thing to me and should be an important thing to the American people.
And I'll be fascinated to see what kind of traction and how that develops as you push it through Congress. That committee, the House Intelligence Committee, also getting a lot of attention because of the Mueller investigation and the investigations into the president and Russia. Most of the talk has been about protecting Mueller and publishing that report if it winds up getting blocked by the administration. Do you plan on House Intelligence to restart the investigation, or has too much damage been done by Devin Nunes and the Republicans when they were in the majority on House Intel to be an effective investigative tool on Trump and Russia?
Well, you're certainly right, Andrew. The committee has a lot of work to do to kind of reestablish the tradition of bipartisanship, which was always an important part of that committee. You know, when it comes to oversight of our intelligence business, and that's a massive operation, you know, $80 billion worth of activities, some of which, you know, toe the line of constitutional rights and that sort of thing. It's really important that we work together as Republicans and Democrats and set aside all partisanship. That's obviously not where we've been. We need to reestablish that. There probably will be some elements of the old investigation, which was prematurely ended by the Republicans, that we will want to follow up on. But no, I don't think the investigation is going to be relaunched in a very big way. What is likely to happen, Andrew, is that we're going to wait and watch to see what Mueller does, who he indicts, what the report says, and then if there are areas that don't have to do so much with criminal indictments, because remember, that's the special counsel's job, not the Congress's job, but have to do with learning more about the nature of Russia or someone else's interference in our election, you can expect us to follow up on that stuff. But you know, we do have an awful lot of work to do in the best of times, overseeing the intelligence community. Of course, we've got to rebuild that committee. But at the same time, yes, while we're not going to, I think, reopen a massive investigation, we are going to follow up on some of the really intriguing leads and questions that were left when the Republicans prematurely shut down that investigation last year.
Finally, Congressman, you also sit on the Financial Services Committee. I'm curious your take on recent market fluctuations, the Trump administration tariff policy and whether that's contributing to it. And do you think we're headed into a recession?
You know, if I could answer that question accurately, Andrew, I'm not sure I'd be standing here right now. I'd be on a beach somewhere. But so I have no idea about you know, my predictions of the economy or the stock market are not very good. I will tell you this though, and you know, I used to be a banker many almost decades ago. The capital markets don't like uncertainty. They don't like unpredictability, and all of the unpredictability and uncertainty that is coming out of our relationship with China, the fact that we've put tariffs on European and Canadian goods, that is having a dampening effect on the economy. Look at what happened to Apple. Apple is a widely held stock. They just yesterday said, hey, we're not selling as many iPhones as we used to, and kaboom, Apple loses 10% of its value in one day. They're not selling as many phones because they've got a lot of uncertainty, particularly in China. So as the president puts these tariffs on, as we don't know how the Chinese respond, as he sort of attacks the independence of the Federal Reserve daily in Twitter, in his Twitter feed, that is a lot of uncertainty and concern in the capital markets that is absolutely part of the reason for the dramatic downtick that we've seen in these last couple of weeks.
Congressman Jim Himes is a Democrat representing the 4th District of Connecticut, sworn in today for another term. Congressman, as always, thanks for a few minutes.
Thank you, Andrew.
And up next, we'll switch from the Senate side over to the House side, or rather the other way around, from the House to the Senate on Capitol Hill. The new Senate will have a slew of cabinet confirmations to deal with. They'll also have a role in the Mueller report once it's issued. We'll get the inside scoop from a reporter on the scene right after this.